Welcome to Intuitive Reactions, the MENA and Gulf regions. This is my number 9. Over the long years that I've worked with the Christian communities in the Middle East, North Africa, and Gulf regions, whether, for instance, with the Middle East Council of Churches or the Jerusalem Interchurch Committee, I've learned a few things. A variegated education that at times was intriguing and at others even amusing. And of the things that I've learned, there is one that often intrigued me and that I had to wrestle with in terms of my own faith. In this vast region, the MENA and Gulf regions, when you say Christian, it is almost invariably assumed that you denote Arab, that you refer to the indigenous population, and therefore you include in this bracket the living stones, as St. Peter refers to them in his first epistle. In other words, the Arab Orthodox, the Catholic, and all Protestant men and women of the region, and not necessarily those who have traveled to the region for any spell of time. It does not easily occur to the hierarchs of the churches or ecumenical organizations, or the grassroots even, that there are also many non-Arab and non-indigenous Christians, men and women. Many of them refer to themselves as missionaries, living in the region too, and contributing richly to it. Granted, their numbers are not that many in the Levant, but they constitute an overwhelming majority of the Christians in many countries of the Gulf regions, the countries that form the Gulf Cooperation Council. So is this aspect of focusing on ethnicity to define matters of faith part of our own Christian, Catholic, and Apostolic creed? Or is it more precisely part of the Christian lore, let alone of its culture and politics? To shed some light on a huge topic of intrigue and amusement in 10 very brief minutes is the very Reverend and Venerable Dr. Bill Schwartz, OBE. Fortunately for me, he's also a dear friend and a longtime counselor. And so I'll drop this impressive but rather prolix title and simply refer to him as Bill. Bill is the Dean of St. Christopher's Anglican Cathedral in Manama, the capital of Bahrain. St. Christopher is one of 2 equal status Anglican cathedrals in the Diocese of Cyprus and the Gulf, the other one being St. Paul's Cathedral in Nicosia that I know quite well as well. Bill is also Archdeacon, and in this capacity, he often travels to 8 countries, the GCC countries, Iraq, Iran, Yemen. So he is in some sense, at least for us lay people, the assistant to Archbishop Michael Lewis, who today is the President Bishop of the province of Jerusalem and the Middle East, in addition to his more regular duties as Bishop of the Anglican Church in Cyprus and the Gulf. But what distinguishes Bill for me, though, is that he is one of a rare breed. Yes, Bill, you are one of a rare breed. There have been other Americans like Kenneth Bailey and Richard Gibson that I've come also to know, but they are few and far between. An American, a proud American born in Nebraska, Bill has lived in the Middle East, North Africa, and Gulf regions since 1972. 3 years in and out of Egypt, and then continuously in this region since the summer of 1976. In almost 45 plus years, pretty much 2/3 of his earthly life to date, he's been accompanied by his wife Edith and his 4 children, who were all born in Cyprus. Bill, welcome to my intuitive reactions. We have very little time, So with this introduction that tried to encapsulate you more professionally and less as a dear friend, let me jump in with the first question. My intriguing question, or the intrigue that I've felt throughout many years. Is the Middle East, North Africa, is the Gulf really only for Arab Christians? How do you feel as an American?
As an American who's been part of the work of the church in this part of the world for my entire adult life, I would actually counter even the premise that Christianity is defined ethnically. Of course, we worship in our own language, we worship in the tradition of our fathers and mothers, and some of us change that tradition and things like that. But the reality is the church is always local. The very beginning of the church, the biggest controversy that the church faced was, is it defined by ethnicity, or is it defined by faith? Mm-hmm. I can go into all kinds of things, biblical references and whatever, but just the plain experience of moving in and around the Middle East and North Africa, experiencing the life of different Christians different ways within their different cultures, part of it comes down to the reality of an economic situation which is increasingly interdependent and not based on any particular nationality. And in all urban centers, you have massive populations that are not local. Mm-hmm. They're local in the sense they live there, but they're not citizens of the country.
Yep.
And in particularly the GCC countries, where in some of them, the non-nationals outnumber the nationals more than 5 to 1. Uh-huh. Some of them only 2 to 1, but in all 6 of the GCC countries, the nationals are outnumbered by the foreign or migrant workers who live there because they can get jobs there and send the money back home and build a future. And so just the whole demographic thing is completely different. But for the church, the Anglican experience in the GCC countries in particular, is we open our doors, all ethnicities, and often different languages. We offer church services in different languages, and we also offer hospitality to congregations which are not Anglican, so they can worship in their language, within their traditions, within our church compounds. And there are hundreds of thousands of Christians in the GCC countries, which most people think are only Muslim, because the statistics are based on the nationals, the citizens.
Yeah.
But the numbers just are almost not understandable until you come and live in it and you see it.
Bill, in those years that you've been across the whole region, you mentioned it very well numerically, and I said in the intro that more so in the Gulf region than in the Levant, this is very, very prominent. But has this misperception, if we want to call it misperception, that Christianity in the Levant equals Arab, equals ethnicity, whether for economic or even sometimes for political reasons, has this in any way hampered your ministry, hampered your work, or even upset you sometimes in your work as an American who is basically working in the vineyard of the Lord in a part of the world which is not America?
There's 2 different answers to that. One is a sense of even anger, mm-hmm. that certain ethnicities are simply invisible. Mm-hmm. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
All of these countries have migrant workers doing the lower paid jobs. And the focus of the church, of course, is to take care of the people who come to church, but they don't necessarily take an interest in other language groups, other social manifestations who are Christians, but are only temporary. And therefore, there's not a sense of need to reach out to them. Mm-hmm. In terms of my personal experience, as you asked, I'm consistently amazed that there's an assumption that because I'm not a citizen of one of the Arab countries, I don't know anything about the Arab countries.
Well, that is,
And I'll not.
first of all, I can disprove that, because not only have you written about your experiences and about the interrelationship between Islam and Christianity, and you've basically written it from a Christian perspective in a Muslim environment, but after 45 years, I would be really surprised if you tell me you do not understand how the region works. So in that sense, it is absolutely correct. And I appreciate the anger as well as the unease that you sometimes, I'm sure, feel when you come across this kind of hurdle, this kind of mindset. But in a broader sense, and again, sorry for the consciousness of time, but in a broader sense, you've been there for 2/3 of your life. You're now what I would call euphemistically the twilight of your ministry before you go back to the United States and rejoin your family there. Any particular impressions, any particular thoughts about how things have changed from the 70s and 80s of the last century to date?
Well, much can be said about the economic development. And I mean, you mentioned 1972. Well, the world was completely different before the 1973 war between Israel and Syria and Egypt primarily, and what most people do remember as the oil boycott,
yep,
which changed the entire dynamic of the economy and created a context of economic development, and therefore the influx of non-nationals into the economic work structure, because people could have jobs to develop these countries. And the countries that were very isolated, all of a sudden now are major players on the international scene, much more conscious of their international reputation and the dynamics that go on in all of the international issues. So the Middle East, you know, when I came here when I was quite young, it was a place completely unknown. But nowadays, if you talk to people, they all know where Saudi Arabia is. Mm-hmm. Everybody does. They all know where Egypt is. In 72, they could point to a map and find Jerusalem, but that was about it. The ignorance was incredible. Nowadays, things are different. And for me, I mean, the wonder of living in this part of the world is the interaction with the incredible spectrum of nationalities, which has taught me a lot of not just Arab culture, but Asian culture, subcontinent, African, because we're all living, working together here in such a way as there's no dominant nationality in terms of how society works.
Can I conclude by saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, by making an assumption that you will leave and go for retirement in due course, being more hopeful or less hopeful about the future of the region?
I mean, there are hopes, of course. There are cynicisms that I will carry. I choose to be hopeful. Mm-hmm. I care about the people, so I must be hopeful. But I am not in any way ignoring the reality of the difficulties that are faced in the intercultural, international, and economic dynamics that this part of the world faces these days.
You know what I would love to do one day, if we both live long enough, to read a biography, an autobiography of yours, where you put some of those thoughts, not compress them in 10 minutes, but put them in a big book, which will guide a lot of people in the future. In the meantime, I want also to finish on a note of hope, because that is the very essence of our faith. And once again, Bill, thank you very, very much for taking part in Intuitive Reactions.
Thanks for inviting me, Harry. It was a joy.